Mace Windu is one of the most powerful Jedi of his time, but also a bit polarizing. This is mainly because Windu stands as the embodiment of the Jedi Order's complete adherence to the Jedi Code. The Jedi, especially in the prequels, are shown to be far from perfect. They preach peace but serve in a war. They suppress emotion rather than deal with it, and Windu is the most prominent representation of that flawed system. He's the highest-ranking council member, second only to Yoda, and he often comes out cold, dismissive, and rather inflexible. He's fiercely committed to the Jedi Code and sees anyone straying from it or behaving too reckless and such as a threat. This can especially be seen in his treatment of Anakin, whom he wanted to become a Jedi due to his age and whose rather unorthodox ways of going about battle often clashed with the Jedi Code. Fans often point to "I sense a plot to destroy the Jedi," followed by "if what you told me is true, you will have earned my trust," as proof that he never respected Anakin, but there are also plenty of other examples. Throughout the Clone Wars series, he's also presented in this dismissive way. The way he handles Ahsoka's banishment from the Order and also this scene just shows how far he had strayed from the way of the Jedi.
What do you mean?
I'm sorry, citizen. These matters are for the Council to discuss.
Literally, you can see that he doesn't really consider Ahsoka someone worth talking to anymore due to her leaving the Order. Perhaps if he would have been less rigid, she might have even shared Maul's warning about Anakin with him, and who knows what could have transpired then. But the way he just cuts her off just comes off as extremely distant and tactless. This is a stark contrast to Jedi like Obi-Wan and Yoda, who are both gentle and sympathetic, trying to help others and uplift them rather than put them down. The thing is, though, this was actually intentionally written that way. Windu's supposed to be a culprit to show everything that's going wrong with the Jedi and how they could fall. In his defense, though, I do think much of the hate he gets is tied more to his portrayal in the movies and later series, rather than to the character's full story. The Revenge of the Sith novelization, Shatterpoint, and several other EU works gave us a more layered Mace, one who was deeply aware of the fine line he walked between light and darkness. He was strict, sure, but not without depth or empathy. Later material in the Clone Wars and Tales of the Jedi seem to really lean harder into the screw Windu angle, stripping away a lot of that nuance and making him a scapegoat for the Jedi's flaws. That's unfortunate, because it flattens a character who was never supposed to be likable, but always worthy of respect. May and Asha are the central characters of the Acolyte, being twin sisters. Unfortunately, much like the rest of the Acolyte, their characterization is a mess, riddled with conveniences and just doing whatever the plot needs them to do. I know that a lot of people haven't actually watched this show, so I'll be talking about its plot a bit as well to explain these characters' confused motivations. Asha is introduced as a former Jedi Padawan who left the Order and became a ship mechanic, while May has spent the past 16 years training under a mysterious Sith Lord, hell-bent on revenge against the 4 Jedi who supposedly destroyed her entire coven of witches. Sounds like a reasonable motivation overall, right? So, May gets introduced by killing one of the 4 Jedi. This leads to a murder mystery chase where the Jedi try to find out who this murderer is. Asha gets accused of being the murderer because they look alike, and thus the Jedi take her along until they find the real murderer. May, meanwhile, manages to kill off a second Jedi, but surprise again, she decides that she'll just turn herself in. Yep, for no reason whatsoever, May, after having killed 2 of the 4 Jedi, decided to turn herself in and surrender herself to the Jedi after learning that Asha was still alive, as she was oblivious to that previously. Let me make it clearer. She learns that her sister is still alive, and decides that all 16 years of training with the Sith is futile now, and she'll simply drop it all and even reveal the Sith's presence to the Jedi. Is there any explanation for this? Nope. May's motivation makes even less sense, as it is then revealed later on that when May and Asha were still children, the Jedi arrived on their planet of witches to get child Asha and May to take them to the Jedi Order, as was tradition for them. Asha wanted to leave their witch clan and join the Jedi, while May did not. Instead of just, talking about it or accepting Asha's choice, May decides that the only logical course of action is to burn everything down. Yep, she sets a fire that destroys the entire coven and leads to all the chaos that ensues. In the fire, one of the Jedi, Master Soul, kills the twins' mother because she turned into this smoke monster and attacked the Jedi, which leads to all the hatred towards these 4 Jedi. So it is rather odd that she would then go ahead and just surrender herself to the murderer of her mother just because she found her sister again. Also, she kind of randomly drops the whole killing the Jedi thing and just switches to that they should just face justice in front of court. Guess her bloodlust was easily stilled. Osha is less offensive overall because she doesn't really do anything and just kind of tags along with the Jedi until the last scene of the show. There, it is revealed to her that Saul had killed her mother and she freaking snaps and out of nowhere just decides to kill her master Saul and join the Sith. Mind you that there was no build-up for that at all, by the way. Even rather, the exact opposite, where we see her accuse May of being a cold-blooded killer. She just kind of goes like, "Oh, he killed my mother, let me kill him now and join the friggin' Sith Order?" See how their motivations are flawed and just really convenient and contrived? I think the writers must have felt so smart and dramatic when they wrote those scenes. Anyways, the Acolyte has so many issues, and I don't really want to talk about it for too long, as I actually really don't care about this show. There's also this dumb twist where May and Osha aren't actually twins, they're the same person, created through Force magic. This revelation is supposed to be a shocking moment, but it doesn't add anything to the story. They're still two separate people with different personalities and motivations, so what was the point? It feels like the writers just wanted to throw in a last-minute mind-blowing twist, Rian Johnson style. Now get these two out of here. The Grand Inquisitor is a character who made his first impression in Star Wars Rebels. There, he was the main antagonist of the first season, being a cold, calculated Jedi hunter. He was intimidating and a real threat to the Rebel crew every time he showed up. So naturally, when he was announced for the Kenobi series, expectations were high, but holy, this version of him is a literal caricature of him, both in design and his portrayal. In Rebels, the Grand Inquisitor is a Padawan with a tall, gaunt, sunken face. In the Kenobi series, though, they rather went with Humpty Dumpty with a bad paint job. Also, instead of the methodical and driven figure from Rebels whose only focus was hunting Jedi, the live-action Grand Inquisitor came off more like a bureaucratic middle manager whose focus is... I actually couldn't tell you. He's all over the place. I know for certain, though, that capturing Jedi certainly isn't his priority. He spends most of his screen time bickering with Reva and doesn't seem to be bothered at all about catching Jedi. Like in the scene on Tatooine, he literally stops Reva from killing the Jedi, and when the Jedi escapes, he just stands there and does nothing. It's your job to catch the Jedi, dude. Are you just gonna let him escape? Okay, sure, just casually watch him get away, I guess. The Grand Inquisitor in Rebels would have never let that happen. He would have personally made sure the Jedi was captured and put the mission before any bickering with his subordinates. In Kenobi, however, he just randomly starts monologuing and making random speeches that don't really serve anything, all while on a mission where the Jedi isn't subdued or even having revealed himself. Like, he even freaking leaves the planet without any reason, even though the Jedi he came for with the other two Inquisitors is still on the loose. He also seems to focus on the glory of getting to catch the Jedi himself instead of just focusing on getting the job done, because when Reva actually gets Obi-Wan out of hiding, he just randomly gets mad at her and tells her that he'll take it from here, even though she actually helped the cause by getting Kenobi to come. See how all of that's completely out of character? Also, let's not forget the fake-out death. Why was it written into the script? Why stab him if they were gonna bring him back? The reasoning given for the plot is laughable and could have easily been written differently. Also, some fans argue that the reason he's so different in the Kenobi series is because of his near-death experience after being stabbed by Reva, so I guess getting stabbed actually made him start to care about catching Jedi now. Yeah, doesn't really add up. To sum it up, the Kenobi show's version of the Grand Inquisitor is literally yet another character assassination compared to his animated counterpart. Boba Fett used to be the mysterious badass of the Star Wars universe. Helmet always on, few words, instant respect. He survived a few minutes of screen time in the original trilogy and still became a legend. The expanded universe turned him into a Mandalorian war machine, the perfect bounty hunter with a complex code and deep lore. But that's not who we got in the Book of Boba Fett. The Disney Plus version of Boba is different. Older, more talkative, and weirdly diplomatic. After escaping the Sarlacc in a near-death experience, we see him spend a lot of time with the Tusken Raiders, which is the reason that he decides to change his way of life. His time with the Tusken is often praised as a very good part of his story by some fans. However, I disagree. His change didn't really make any sense, as the Tuskens didn't really treat him well in my opinion. Like, they literally capture and torture him, dragging him through the deserts and almost dehydrating him. But apparently, after saving the Tusken kid for no reason other than empathy, he then goes on to adapt their culture. See how that doesn't really make sense? Either he has a terminal stage version of Stockholm Syndrome, or he was just waiting his entire life for the chance to jump into the Tusken Raider culture, and had finally achieved that goal. Like, I get that a near-death experience can change one's view, but what exactly did the Tusken do to make him decide to spend his time with them now? His motivations are just not explained properly. After the Tusken arc, he then goes on to become the Major of Mos Espa, which also is very questionable as to why he even has this connection to Tatooine. Also, why would a bounty hunter now want to become the ruler of an empire? None of this is really explained either. The argument is often that it's supposed to be a story about a reformed killer who's trying to rule with respect, but their execution of it was just terrible. He appears very soft, and it's so hard to imagine that this guy used to be a brutal bounty hunter. Like, look at this scene here, where the Major Domo says that the mayor doesn't have time to meet him.
If you wish to continue breathing, I advise you to weigh your next words carefully.
That was a bit heavy-handed, don't you think?
Do you want the appointment or not?
Yeah, seems really heavy-handed to threaten someone with a blaster. Jeez, guess speaking up for yourself is something. You've never done that before, right, Boba? Like, he should be the one to say that line that Fennec says. He should be going around threatening people if they don't fall in line. But him saying it's too heavy-handed to threaten the Major Domo just shows how they completely misunderstood his character. He literally does nothing in this show. He gets beaten at every turn and needs some outside intervention to be saved. He even gets clowned on by the Major Domo character.
If you'll excuse me, I'll see what I'm able to do.
Did he just lock the door?
But instead of shooting him in the head, which is what I really wanted him to do, as the Major Domo annoyed me to no end, he just kinda takes it and talks it off. Like, bruh, he's literally disrespecting you here. Do something about it. You are running a crime empire, not a summer camp where good vibes alone will carry you through it. Like, show that disobeying or disrespecting you will have consequences. But, nope, at every turn, be it these moped guys or the Wookiee who either try to kill him or disrespect him, he in turn hires them and gives them a job. Yep, the Wookiee assassin is now working for you. No further repercussions for literally trying to murder you a few days ago. Way to go, Boba. Way to be a friggin' doormat for every character in the show to take advantage of. How are the other crime syndicates supposed to take him seriously when every time they send someone to try to take him out, manipulate or scheme him into their bidding, he just kind of excuses them and goes like, yeah, I didn't like that. Please don't do it again. And even friggin' hires them. Hell, he even has the Major Domo stick around in his palace. So yeah, Boba is unfortunately just a buffoon now, and it's really sad to see him get assassinated like that. Ki-Adi Mundi. Oh dear Ki-Adi, how far you have fallen from grace. He is one of the more recognizable members of the Jedi Council in the prequels thanks to his huge forehead, and also because he's one of the few Jedi Council members who actually has dialogue in the movies and isn't just a prop to sit on the council. He sits alongside Yoda and Mace Windu on the council, serving as one of the Republic's most senior Jedi, and being one of the most powerful ones during his time. But, much like Windu, he symbolized one of the most frustrating examples of the Jedi Order's blind spots. Actually, he is even argued to be a complete sociopath, due to a myriad of different scenes in the movies and series where he's just flat out wrong. These include, but are not limited to, denying the return of the Sith, denying Dooku being able to turn to the dark side, ignoring Duchess Satine's request for aid for Mandalore, being the first to accuse Ahsoka, leading to her banishment, as well as wanting to keep Yoda at Coruscant when he had his visions, and nearly leading to Yoda never learning about becoming a Force ghost. Yeah, not the best track record for good decision-making. What is this ode to? Because he was, once again, a complete adherent to the Jedi Code, being detached, emotionless, and distanced. Mundi is often seen to completely deny emotion, even going as far as to shrug off the death of his family as shit happens, and simply telling Anakin during Obi-Wan's supposed death that he should just move on. He's completely stuck in this worldview and seems to ignore any sort of flexibility. Furthermore, he's also responsible for the war crime of using flamethrowers against the very much so sentient and intelligent Geonosians. The final nail in the coffin is that he actually had a family, as mentioned previously. Mundi is one of the only Jedi allowed to maintain a family. He has wives and children on Saria, because of the low birth rate on his homeworld. That alone wouldn't be a big deal, except it exposes a big double standard in the Jedi Order. Strict codes for some, exceptions for others, and Mundi being the biggest hypocrite of them all. These theories were mainly spread through a myriad of YouTube videos and have since kinda set the narrative about Mundi, with most people really disliking him and saying he's the worst Jedi aside from someone like Krell.
We do not have many ships to spare.
What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?
The nightsisters from Dathomir were introduced in the Clone Wars TV series and have since been used in a lot of other mediums, like the Fallen Order games as well as the Ahsoka series. In their appearances, we see them use their nightsister magic in several different methods. These feats include, but are not limited to, making Savage into a towering monster with seemingly no negatives at all, create weapons like Savage's axe or Talzin's sword seemingly out of thin air, use a crystal ball to know the exact location of any being in the galaxy, creating voodoo dolls out of people's hair which don't seem to have any sort of range limit, making people invisible, erase Maul's insanity, becoming an intangible mist thing that can't be pierced by weapons and move through walls, look into the future, raising zombies, and a whole lot of other things. If you couldn't tell by my tone, all these abilities are overpowered to no end, and create a whole lot of problems. It's unclear where their abilities stop, and in the Ahsoka show we expand on this even further. The three mothers there seem to be able to create an entire zombie army that isn't even brain dead like the ones in the Clone Wars, but can follow commands, walk in unison, and basically be like regular undead soldiers. Heck, friggin' Marok in the Ahsoka series seems like a regular dude in every way, despite apparently having been dead for decades at that point. How isn't that the most overpowered thing ever, and especially, why have none of these nightsisters ever used this ability on a wider scale? Why wouldn't they just raise every dead person in the galaxy to come to aid them in whatever their reasoning for helping Thrawn is? Why wouldn't they just take over the galaxy themselves? Why didn't Mother Talzin voodoo doll Palpatine? Why could Talzin even be killed by Grievous's lightsabers, even though we see her being able to dissolve herself into thin air at a moment's notice? What I'm getting at is, there seems to be no limit to their power, and they're just kinda able to do whatever the plot requires them to do. And then, the writers expect you to just not think too hard what the further implications of said abilities could be. I like the concept of zombies in Star Wars, I really do. But the Nightsister at this point have overstayed their welcome for myself, with all their overpowered feats that seem to have no further consequences. It isn't explained at all if there are any limitations to their powers, what's required to use them, and thus they're rather poor characters in Star Wars. Sabine Wren is introduced first as part of the Ghost Crew in Star Wars Rebels. She was their go-to explosives girl with a vibrant armor, a rebellious spirit, and rather impressive blaster skills. During her time on Rebels, she has a CV that would probably put most people in the galaxy in her shadow. At the age of just 21 years old, she had been a former Imperial developer, Mandalorian, bounty hunter, as well as rebel freedom fighter responsible for the liberation of the entire planet. Yes, she had a lot going on. These factors, combined with an alright personal story where she had personally developed a weapon that the Empire used against her people, which led her to want to fight the Empire, made her quite well liked, even making her a sort of a role model for a lot of young girls, which is very wholesome, if I may say. However, then the Ahsoka show dropped and the fandom started to split. In Ahsoka, Sabine's motivations became a lot more personal and questionable. The biggest sticking point? Her decision to hand over the map to Thrawn's location just to potentially find Ezra. Fans were not thrilled. It felt like a major regression, putting the galaxy at risk to possibly reconnect with a friend. No matter how loyal or heartfelt the reasoning was, you would especially expect someone like Sabine, who had first-hand fought against and seen all the horrors of the Empire at a personal level, would be the last person to be a culprit to help the Empire potentially return. So yeah, her motivation in the Ahsoka show didn't make a lot of sense. Her connection to Ezra was great, obviously, but Ezra being the only one who could help her feels less lonely is also just a slap in the face to all the other Rebels' character. So yeah, Sorry, Zeb and Hera, I guess you were just cool to have in the Ghost group, but actually all she ever cared about was Ezra. Also, her sudden Force sensitivity was also kind of out of left field. Her training under Ahsoka felt underdeveloped, and her actual progress in using the Force was extremely inconsistent. She literally goes from not being able to pull a glass toward leaping Ezra up the Star Destroyer with little effort. Mind you, without having anything really happen, that would have given her more training except for a pep talk from Ahsoka. Her being Force sensitive also messes with the world building on how the Force works, and that not just everyone can become a Jedi. We have a thing called midichlorian counts, which show how Force sensitive someone is, which puts people into certain levels where no matter how much training you have, there are certain feats you just can't do. That's why Anakin and Sidious's power level is higher than someone like Obi-Wan or Ahsoka. With Sabine going from a Force novice to being able to make Force pushes as strong as shown, just messes with the power level shown in Star Wars, and I just don't like stuff that contradicts this. I always felt that Sabine's main thing was that she was very tech-savvy and skilled without relying on the Force, just like Boba Fett. Giving her the Force out of nowhere feels extremely forced and just doesn't feel right to me. Watto is actually a slightly controversial character in Star Wars. Why is that, you may ask? He's not essentially powerful or central to the story. He's introduced in The Phantom Menace as a junk dealer and slave owner on Tatooine, the guy who owns both Anakin and Shmi Skywalker. So right off the bat, the guy's a slave owner, which is despicable when looking at it from our moral standpoint, but for the sake of the plot and in the greater Star Wars universe, it was actually quite common to own slaves in the Outer Rim and the world established. Thus, it served a narrative purpose. Furthermore, he's scrappy and greedy, profiting off of people's suffering and sees no issue with it. But the real reason Watto sparks debate is his depiction. With his exaggerated accent, mannerisms, and obsession with money, a lot of fans and critics have pointed out uncomfortable parallels to anti-Semitic or anti-Middle Eastern stereotypes. George Lucas never confirmed any intent behind his portrayal, but it doesn't change the fact that Watto's character design and voice raise serious questions about the representation in sci-fi media. He's not the only Star Wars alien to toe that line, but he's one of the most glaring examples. He appears again in Attack of the Clones with a bit more humility and even some regret, so yeah, I think the controversy behind him is understandable, but I think it adds to his character, and he's also a major part of why Anakin's backstory is the way it is. Although, to be honest, he actually gave Anakin a lot of free time and such, unlike how I'd imagined a slave would be treated. Luke Skywalker in the original trilogy was the beating heart of the Star Wars saga. Farm boy to Jedi Knight, he faced Vader, resisted the dark side, and believed in redemption when no one else did. That's the Luke people grew up with, the hopeful hero. So, when The Last Jedi dropped and showed us a bitter, isolated Luke who rejected the Force and hid away on Ahch-To, the fandom exploded. Some people found this arc was a powerful, honest betrayal of failure. Others think it flat out betrays who Luke was. The pro side argues that this is what happens when legends crack under pressure. Luke tried to rebuild the Jedi all by himself, failed spectacularly with Ben Solo, and let guilt destroy him. So he chose to disappear, convinced the Jedi needed to end because him and the Order had become a symbol of failure. For some people, they felt this was a realistic story of a broken old man. What these fans don't understand, though, is that Luke Skywalker wouldn't do this. Some other random old dude, sure, maybe. But not Luke. This is the guy who refused to kill Vader even when the Empire told him to. Who believed in the light when no one else did. The idea that Luke would even momentarily consider killing his nephew in his sleep felt like a character assassination. And in the fact that he cut himself off from the Force and left his friends to fight the First Order alone, even letting his friends die, it just doesn't make any sense. This is the guy who rushed off to Dagobah to get to Bespin to help his friends, fully aware that it was a trap. And now we're supposed to believe that he just abandoned all of this and watches idly by as his friends in the galaxy get destroyed? In the EU, he became the greatest Jedi in history, always trying his best to make the galaxy a better place and fighting on the front line to defend his values. Sadly, we won't ever see this version of Luke ever on the big screen. The Knights of Ren were only seen in a split second during The Force Awakens in 2015. This scene was enough at the time for fans to create a whole bunch of theories and other things about them. Who they were, what they could be. Were they a new breed of dark side warriors? Were they fallen Jedi? Were they some insane cult that follows the dark side? Well, as with all characters in the sequel, they fell completely short of expectations and were just glorified wallflowers. Rian Johnson decided not to do anything with them in The Last Jedi, and when J.J. Abrams came in for The Rise of Skywalker, he decided to use them again for this.
Knights of Wren. Ghouls.
Ghouls! Yep, that's all we learn about them before they get their asses kicked by Kylo during the final fight. Even the Inquisitors get better portrayal, and that says quite a lot, if even these absolute jokes of characters get more out of them than you. To be fair, there is a comic series that tried to flesh them out. In that version, they're shown as a violent, Force-sensitive gang of different mercenaries that Kylo eventually takes over after killing their previous leader. But still, we don't really know anything else about the individual members. It's truly sad that when back in the days of the EU, minor background characters like Amanaman or Max Rebo, who appear for like 3 seconds in the background of Jabba's palace, have a whole backstory of how they ended up there, and these guys just get, yeah, they're mercenaries and like the dark side. Waste of more insane costume designs, and that's all there is to them. To be honest, my personal interest in them is non-existent at this point anyway, and I think that reflects a lot of the fandom.